So again, welcome to this No Asylum Ban public comment action. Today is Tuesday, March 21st, and we're glad to have you with you. Glad to have you here with all of us virtually. My name is Lisa, and I serve as the Justice Coordinator for the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And I will walk us through a little bit about who the Federation is and what we'll be up to today in this half-hour program. So first, just a note about who the Federation is and what we're about. The Federation is an organization that came in the wake of the Second Vatican Council. We're a dynamic union of sisters of St. Joseph throughout the United States. And what that means is we have 16 congregations that trace their common origin to Le Puy, France in 1650. This includes approximately 3,000 sisters, 3,000 associates, and many other partners in mission. We range from Los Angeles to Maine, from St. Louis to Long Island, from St. Paul to Cleveland. So we're really all over the country. Our main desire that we share together is to reflect a profound love of God and dear neighbor without distinction. We're committed to living and working so that all might be one. So we do that in a variety of ways, including programs like this, to galvanize and to educate our folks, to collectively act and really reflect our witness to the gospel. So again, glad to have you here today. Today, we'll have a brief opening prayer led by some members of the Federation's Immigration Working Group. I'll then offer a brief introduction for our two speakers. We're going to have a little bit of civic education on what is a public comment. I'm very excited for that personally. And we'll then have some information and background on this new proposed asylum ban rule that came down in February, just a little under a month ago. So we'll have a little bit of time for background and some questions and answers. Finally, we're going to take some time to act collectively together. Sometimes we just need that accountability to take 5 minutes and submit a public comment. So we'll do that together today. And as always, if you have to leave or duck out early, feel free to do that. The recording will be available on our Facebook page, so you can feel free to share it later. Okay, so I'm going to invite two members of our Federation Immigration Working Group to the virtual stage to lead our prayer. And they are Sister Colleen Dauerbach, who's a sister of St. Joseph of Philadelphia, and Sister Donna Breslin, who's a sister of the Blessed Sacrament, who works with Colleen in Philadelphia in the Justice Office. We're delighted to have them here.
And so we pray. Today, we gather to lift up our prayers to Joseph, to help us unite our voices in support of the right to seek asylum in our country. We support a policy to build a new and equitable asylum process that will provide safety and freedom, especially to the Black, Brown, and Indigenous people that we serve.
We look to Joseph, who personally experienced closed doors when seeking shelter for his family. He knew what it felt like to travel with empty hands as he helped his family to escape the dangers in his own homeland. We pray through the intercession of Joseph to turn to hope, hope that finds a way when there is none. And to this, we say, Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I'm now delighted to introduce our two speakers. So first, we have the Assistant Director of the Federation, Kristen Whitney Daniels, who's coming to us from Connecticut today. Kristen has been with the Federation since May 2018 and has also been a St. Joseph worker. And she comes to us as a longtime advocate of insulin for all and is going to tell us a little bit more about public comments in a moment. We also have, I'm pleased to say, let me add that spotlight on you, Ronnate Asirwatham, who serves as the Director of Government Relations for Network Catholic Social Justice Lobby. She is the lead lobbyist on immigration and a former asylum seeker herself. So I'm again delighted to have both of you here, just really committed to the good work that we all need in this world. So with that, I will pass it over to Kristen.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm really excited to talk about public comments because I feel this is just an underused way of participating in our government. And so I'm going to go over a really high-level overview so we have enough time to go over the really important specifics of this. But feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I can answer them later or during the Q&A. So just to get started, what is a public comment? So a public comment is really a way for anyone to weigh in on federal agencies' proposed rules or regulations that are under consideration by the US government. These comments can be made online or in print, but today we'll be discussing Network's streamlined process, which is all online and makes it super easy to participate. When any federal agency creates a new regulation, needs a new rule, it all starts with the Federal Register, which is, you can access this online. It's essentially a daily newspaper of what's happening in the government. And this is important because this includes all the details of what this particular rule we're talking about today. So when any federal agency needs to add, edit, or alter a proposed or existing rule, it has to go to a comment period. So people can comment on really anything. Obviously, there's some bigger things that catch public attention, but there's a lot of smaller things that if you wanted to propose a comment on, you can. There's typically a 60-day period for commenting once it's published in the Federal Register. However, for this particular rule, it was only 30 days, which is disappointing that they narrowed it down so much. But after that period, there's a 30-day period for the agency to reply to the comments. And by law, agencies have to review all public comments received, and they're required to respond to all comments when they respond about the final regulation about what's going to happen. They have to explain their rationale for not for not incorporating a comment. And I think that's really interesting because it really does allow us to really fully participate. I will say that I put a little caveat on it, which I'll get into a little bit later, just to say that some comments will be bulked together. And then I think comments that are not really specific to the rule, people who are just kind of spamming it, they don't really have to respond to those in particular. We'll go to the next slide. So why participate in the public comment process? Essentially, why are we here? It's an important part of civic engagement and a part of really a democracy. It offers an opportunity for all people, not just lawmakers, to participate in the drafting and refining of laws. It allows for the participation beyond voting. So people who maybe are disenfranchised, people who maybe don't have votes, can still participate in this process. But that also does mean that groups, organizations, nonprofits, lobbying groups, other federal agencies can also all make a public comment if it's pertaining to their particular work. It also ensures that on-the-ground expertise and experiences are taken into account. If you're personally affected by an issue or work with people that are affected by this issue, that weighs heavily in this process. And commenting is also an opportunity to point out issues or other alternatives. You know, when people make bills, they have this one experience. They usually have a lot of people commenting on that experience and what's happening, but there's a good chance that your particular perspective hasn't been considered, and this is your opportunity to make that heard. And if a public comment presents compelling information, the federal agency has to take appropriate action. And even if your comments do not end up changing the regulation, they're important because they have been used in potential litigation. It creates essentially this administrative record that a federal agency or decision maker has to consider when finalizing. And they have used comments made and saying that you did not take this into consideration and roll back certain rules and regulations, and judges can invalidate that rule. Like I said, all substantial and unique public comments must be read and acknowledged. The unique part will come in later when I talk about what makes a good comment. And just to say that when they provide their comments to the comments, if there's a lot of them on one bulk issue, they can just do one thing for several comments. And it also is important because it's kind of public perception. You know, if there's a lot of people commenting on a particular bill, one, that catches people's attention, but two, it can help decision makers determine whether it's really popular or whether it's not popular at all. And this is an important way to participate. Thanks, Lisa. And so what makes a good public comment? Now, this is very general. Ronnate's going to talk to you about the very specifics of this regulation. But it's important that you mention any pertinent credentials and establish your expertise. If you have any expertise in this area, you're a lawyer, you work with communities most impacted, put that in your comment. It can also include personal experience. I'm a big believer that expertise is its own, or personal experience is its own very important expertise in the process. All comments do become part of public record, so your name will be attached to your comments. However, if you're worried about your own immigration status or there's a fear of retribution, you can submit them anonymously or have like a third person, a friend, a lawyer, somebody like that to submit the comments on your behalf. Really important to be clear about your positions. Specifics are great versus generalizations. And then Ronnate's going to talk about some of the questions that are proposed in the public comment. But when you are looking at the public comments or on the Federal Register, there will be certain questions that are outlined that the government wants people to weigh in on. So if you can speak to those specifics, your comment is weighted much more heavily because that's what they're particularly asking people to weigh in on. Cite your sources if you have them. And then again, Network has really excellent talking points, but you want to diversify what you're writing. When the agency is replying to comments, they can categorize similar comments together. And Network has this really great comment of, before you press send, check to be sure that at least 1/3 of your public comment is original to you, because ones that are copy and paste are not really considered by the reviewers. And typically, if you're doing this for another thing, you would go to the Federal Registry. This is what it looks like on regulations.gov. You can see that the yellow arrow is pointing to how many days are left. So it tells you exactly how many days you have left to comment. So this was yesterday, so 7 days. Green is where you can see your comments. It does take time for the government to, officially register and put your comments in there, but you can always track it that way. And then the blue arrow points to how you can kind of search and keep track of it. Typically, you can go to the Federal Registry and say that you want to follow your comments and you'll get updates on them. So Ronnate's going to go into more information on the proposed rule and how to submit your comments.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everyone. So let me get into, just so everyone knows, I'm from Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice, and I work in DC on this. And let's get to the asylum ban itself. So as you saw, I think in Kristen's last slide, this asylum ban rule is actually officially called the Circumvention of Lawful Pathways, which is kind of funny because it does actually circumvent lawful pathways instead of giving too many new pathways. So what is in it? It is similar to the Trump rule, or there was a Trump rule banning asylum and transit ban a couple of years ago, and this is similar to that. And it's similar in two ways. One is that there is metering. I don't know if many of you remember, and it's still in process. If you all went to the border, you all heard of something called metering, where asylum seekers who were in Mexico would have to come up to the port of entry, and usually it was somebody else, not the Mexican government or the American government, would have a list of people, and you put your name on this list, and then you'll be like, they'll give you a number. So this does have metering, but it is digital metering. So it's called the CBP1 app. It is in use right now. It started a couple of months ago, where you have to get an appointment through this app. I will go into how terrible this app is in the next slide, but right now, and it's good to understand that this asylum ban rule, or this circumvention of lawful pathways rule, is similar to the Trump rule, which the District Court of DC said was unlawful. And it is similar in two ways. One is because of this metering, and the second because it also proposes a transit ban. And what it says exactly is that if you pass through any country that has signed up to the UN Refugee Convention and Protocol, then you have to ask for asylum in that country. So again, this transit ban, so this basically means like everybody except Mexicans. But just because one country has signed up to the Refugee Convention, it doesn't mean that it has a functioning asylum system, and B, it doesn't mean that person X and any person can ask for asylum in that country. It is much more difficult than simply doing that, and sometimes it's just dangerous for people to ask for asylum in these countries. For example, a Venezuelan indigenous Black person, it will be just as dangerous for them to ask for asylum in Honduras or Guatemala, or even Mexico, so it's just just as dangerous for that as much as it is in Venezuela itself. So it just doesn't make any sense. So next slide. So while we are calling this the asylum ban rule, and as I said, there's two reasons why it's exactly like the Trump's ban. Biden says no, we have put exemptions to this. It's not a ban. It is simply conditions on asking for asylum. And there are exemptions. So the exemptions are this ban does not apply to unaccompanied children. That is good. We are thankful. It's wonderful. The other exemption, it says, and all of these exemptions, I should say, it's couched in language that sounds good, but in practicality, it is actually bans, and I will explain why. So the other exception is if you cannot access the CBP1 app because of a language barrier or a technical glitch or other exceptional circumstances, you can show a preponderance of evidence and get an exemption. It sounds simple enough, but let me explain this app. So at this point, people are using this app for Title 42 exceptions. And there are so many problems with this app. One is you have to, it can only happen in Mexico, so you have to be in Mexico within a certain range to the border. Second is you have to have a really good working internet. This internet should be on par with the best package that you can get in the US. Some of even my internet would not work because it does have glitches and stuff. But can you imagine that in Mexico, in a shelter, that you could get this, especially when you are having at least 100,000 people try to access this app at the same time. Second is you have to be very still and hope, there are several glitches with this. It doesn't take your photo just on a regular basis, and it has been proven in the last couple of months to deny darker skinned people their photographs. If you don't take a photograph, the app doesn't work at all. And obviously children under 10, children under 15, if this shakes, it doesn't take a photo, the app doesn't work at all. And for women as well, if you have been to the border, you will understand that many people who are fleeing the border are fleeing domestic violence. They cannot go to places which has good internet and stand, with the adequate light to take a photograph, because they don't want to show their faces. They are hiding. So this app is just a barrier in so many ways, not to mention that this app has 52 questions. So first of all, you need to get make sure your photo gets there. Then you need to answer these 52 questions in only 3 languages. So English, Spanish, and now Haitian Creole. There are many, many more languages that of people who come to the border, as we know. And so this app really should never be the only way people should come to this. But, on the face of it, as I said, people say, oh, the rule says, oh, don't worry, if you can't access it, then you have an exemption. But this is not true because of the words of the preponderance of evidence. So think again, there is a person, Maria, she is a Fumo, so it's an indigenous person, Black Venezuelan. She has traveled through all the countries and then come into the country without the CBP. So she hasn't come through a port of entry. So what happens? She gets arrested immediately. So she tried the CBP app. It didn't work in so many places. But because she's arrested, her phone is taken away. Where is she to find this preponderance of evidence? She can't, people don't even understand her in her language, and yet she is supposed to show this. So this is why this app, being the only way, especially to get in here, is a bar. It's a barrier. It's just not a certain oh yes, there's an exception to this rule. That is not true. The other way that there are exceptions is the parole authorization. So Biden, with this rule, he also said, okay, I am giving parole to people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. But again, and then we already have the Ukrainian parole system. We have Afghan parole system, and then there's a humanitarian parole. So if you get any one of those, and it requires you to fly, except for the humanitarian parole, it requires you to fly in. So you fly in, this ban does not apply to you. But if you come through the border, the only parole authorization that you can walk across the border is humanitarian parole. And that, again, has a real high threshold. You have to show that you really, so humanitarian parole, you have to show that, okay, your life is really in danger much more than if you are simply asking for asylum or you have a health issue, and I'll get back to that. With the parole program that Biden has proposed, the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuela one, you have to fly. So you have to have a passport, you have to get you have to buy your own ticket, and you have to have a sponsor in the US. Please understand that all of these conditions are new for asylum seekers, right? And it is a barrier to simply be like, oh yes, there's only 4 nationalities. So, and if you take the Ukrainian and Afghan nationalities, 5 nationalities that actually can come to this country. Asylum seeking has never been and should never be nationality based as the only way. Yes, you can have exceptions to the rule, but the rule has to be that you have the right to seek asylum. And then the other exemption is that not only have you sought asylum, but you have been denied asylum in any of these transit countries. As I already said, it is sometimes much more dangerous for people to seek asylum. The fact that you have to even wait around and get a piece of paper that says, oh yes, you were denied, that is almost next to impossible. So that is why, again, I said this is why we say this is a ban despite all these exemptions. Next slide, please.
So Ronnate,
So-
we're a little short on time.
I'll be very quick.
Yeah, no, all good. I just want to give you a heads up. Yeah.
Thank you. So the Biden also says in this rule, no, this is not a ban because you can rebut this. So you manage to get in to the US, and then you say, oh, we have, compelling circumstances for an acute medical emergency, imminent and extreme threat to life, and victim of severe form of trafficking. Again, this sounds good, but it is, again, almost impossible to prove. First is exceptionally compelling circumstances. The burden of proof on that is huge. I will not get into this at the moment. Acute medical emergency is more than what you would have for humanitarian parole. You have to have medical evidence of a high rate, and then you also have to show, so there are two things. Not only medical evidence that you're ill and you have an acute problem, you have to also show that in all of the countries you pass through, they could not give you that medical process. Getting that kind of information is not easy, even like for someone who is able to do research. So can you imagine for an asylum seeker who is fleeing persecution? Imminent and extreme threat to life. Again, this sounds like, yes, of course. If you're living in Mexico, if you are especially a Black person or a person, LGBTQ plus person, you are in imminent and extreme threat, in danger living in Mexico, but that's not enough. It says no generalizations. You can't say, okay, there's a 70% chance that I've been raped. 13,000 people have been raped before me. And therefore, it's more than likely that I will be raped. So I need to come in through the process right now. No, that is not enough. This threshold, again, it has to be like today, okay, I have got a credible, somebody sent me a message in writing, they're going to rape me today. So that is the reason why. If it was last week, too bad. And the other rebuttal is, if you are a form if you have suffered trafficking, this is the regular, this has the regular threshold, and so that's a good thing. And the final one is that it says, oh yes, you can rebut it if you want to avoid family separation. But the wording is avoid family separation if granted withholding of removal. Again, this is a huge process. I can go into it separately, but it's not simply like, oh, the family is being separated, so we will grant you an exception, or grant you a rebuttal, and give you all asylum. No, you have to prove like 5 other things for this one person who is traveling with you, and then maybe if somebody else got asylum, they will give you asylum. That's not it. Next slide, please. And so on the comments. So basically, following from what Kristen said, what we really want to push through with this comments are that these conditions, the ones that I've told you about the metering and the transit ban, are simply not conditions. They're bars, they're bans, they're barriers to people coming into this country. It is not a legal pathway, because the legal pathway is the right to seek asylum, no matter how you arrive. The laws of this country say this. The Immigration and Nationalist Act says this. Immigration and Naturalization Act says this, that you have the right to seek asylum regardless of the way you come in. And such a bottleneck will not stop people from crossing. There's too much of a burden for asylum seekers. And the last point that they do want to ask you to comment on is this rule is supposed to be for 24 months. So 2 years from May 11th. So this means it'll go into like January of 2025, where it'll be after the next presidential election, basically. So they're asking you to comment and say, oh, is this good? Is this bad? In the sense of this timeline. And this is why we are saying, again, this is going to be forever, and it is going to change the ways of asylum, the way to seek asylum as we know it. It's because, we don't know what will happen after the presidential election in 2025, and who's to say that nobody can extend it. So that's from me, and I'm sorry I went over.
No, that's okay. Thanks so much, Ronnate and Kristen, for that amazing wealth of information. So I'm excited to share on this next slide. If you are still able to stay on for a few minutes, we're going to act together and submit that public comment to the public record. Just to note that you can scan, if you have a smartphone, you can scan this QR code and it will take you to this link The link will also be put in the chat in a moment. I wonder if one of my tech folks is able to do that. Oh, it should be listed there. So feel free to submit. And when you're done writing your comment, again, make sure at least 1/3 of it is unique to you, being as specific as possible, sharing your lived experience and expertise. The page that Network Lobby has set up is really comprehensive in offering those details. So we're going to take about 4 minutes or so right now. I know we're past the hour to submit this comment. And once you are done submitting your comment, feel free to write in the chat, done, and think about who you're going to share that with. Encourage them to act. The deadline for this public comment period is March 27th. So it's really critical that we raise our voices in solidarity now to really oppose this proposed asylum ban. You go ahead and write it down. All right, I'm gonna pause the music and come off mute just for a second to check in with folks. It looks like based on your Zoom faces, you're still writing, which is great. So we'll just give it another minute or two. And again, if you have to duck out, because it's past the hour, feel free to do that. But just really encourage you to follow up with this. Oh, I've seen it already made a comment in the chat. Great, done, awesome. Mine's been submitted already, great. I'm just gonna continue to have this slide up. Feel free to keep writing. So one thing to mention that Ronnate just shared with me is that after this comment period, network will be gathering and collecting these comments, and it will be sent to each congressional member. So that's why it's important when you're filling out your comment, you have your name and your address, your mailing address. So that'll go to the correct congressional representative. So they're going to hear from you, which is great. They work for us. Okay, the very last thing, again, as you wrap up those comments. Okay, one question I got really quick, maybe I'll pass this over to Kristen, is we might need a few more thoughts to put or a few more minutes to put our thoughts together. So are we allowed to use the suggested text as an opening, or does that make it like it's not going to be unique enough? So either, I guess, Kristen or Ronnate. We want to make sure it's unique, but can we use the suggested text as an opening?
Yeah, I would say that you could definitely use the suggested text. I would kind of think of it as a framework. It would probably be better if you switched sentence structure or added your own thoughts to it to really diversify it. Because if you really think about it, it's 2 paragraphs. And if you want, like at least a third of it to be original, like how many more paragraphs you would have to add. So it's better to change it up as much as you possibly can.
You've been rearranging some of those suggested text pieces in the opening. Great. Any other questions or thoughts? I know we are at about 10 after, so I want to respect folks' time. The last thing I'll mention is that you see on the screen, it says #NoAsylumBan. One thing that the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange and the Justice Center have done in the past few weeks is to issue a social media challenge. So once you're done submitting your comment, you're invited to share that and tag 5 friends or 5 colleagues in your social media post and say, hey, this is important, please submit and address your concerns in this public comment period. So you're invited to do that. And I'm so glad to see many folks have already submitted comments or they just did today. The key is, there's a tight time frame. So March 27th is the deadline at 11:59 p.m. Okay, and with that, the last thing I'll share is just a contact information slide in case you have more questions. Oh yeah, Echo, okay, thanks, Cecilia. Feel free to reach out to Ronnate. Of course, our folks at Network are just really capable and competent and kind humans. So thank you for joining us, Ronnate, in your busy days. And thanks to Kristen for sharing her wisdom around public comments. And thanks to the Federation Immigration Working Group for hosting this flash session of public action. So at this time, I'm going to stop the recording on Zoom so that if people want to come off mute and say hello, feel free to do that. Again, we're so glad you could join us and continue to act collectively for the common good. Take care. Mm-hmm.